This week, why FNB is a cooler bank than ABSA or Standard, and why putting back into the community has benefited the Protea Hotels brand. Answers coming up on Mags on Media, where we also go on location and visit arguably South Africa's most successful advertising agency. Let's start the show. So what makes FNB a cooler bank than Standard or ABSA, and can SAA, with all its problems, really be called cool? Well, South Africa's youth has spoken in the annual Sunday Times Generation Next Awards. The programme is managed by Jason Levin from HDI Youth Marketeers, who joins me along with Segers from Protea Hotels, also voted coolest in its category. Gentlemen, we've had this conversation before, but let me just to contextualize it again. What is a cool brand? I'm going to say to you that it's almost impossible to discern, because cool in itself is such a subjective term.
It is, and the way it's asked in the study makes it more subjective, because literally the questions put to respondents, 8 to 23-year-olds, is what is the coolest X? Yeah. It's not what is your favorite, which do you use most. It's left specifically to the respondent's subjectivity.
How do you define cool?
We define it as something that is the most relevantly compelling brand in that category. So sometimes, I mean, you spoke about banks just now. Banks that are considered cool are not because they're trying too hard to be cool. In fact, that immediately drops them down the cool rankings. They're just the banks who do what they do very well, very interestingly and very compellingly. Some categories like fashion, there's obviously a much closer connection to coolness. But lots of the more utilitarian categories, the brands win because they do what they do well and with some level of compellingness.
FNB is the coolest bank. It knocks out its competitors. I'm going to say to you, Jason Levin, it's all due to good and frequent advertising, and thanks very much to Steve.
It's a combination of those things. Yeah, it's the 9th year of the study. ABSA won that award for 7 years, interestingly. FNB took the kudos last year for the first time and maintained them this year. I think when we probe it with youth, their responses are the brand is present, as you say, but I wouldn't say any more present than ABSA, for instance. But they're seen as highly innovative. You just have to say to a teen, this account comes with a free iPad, and suddenly it's a cool brand.
Bingo,
and then they ran a campaign earlier this year, a very controversial campaign, but certainly it was very youth resonant because it featured young people, the views of young people. It didn't necessarily make it more popular or more cool, but it certainly made it more top of mind. So it's checking a lot of the right boxes.
Josie's Fire and Ice, which is a part of the Protea brand.
Correct.
You're going to tell me that that's got a lot to do with shaping perception in the youth market. It's a brand that is quirky, it's eccentric, it's a little off the wall sometimes. Again, talking to your earlier point, that's what that market is looking for.
Starting with fun and friendly. Again, it's a brand within Protea Hotels, a lifestyle brand, and what we recognized, I think as far back as 2005, 2006, is that there was a market that was needed to be identified to what their requirements and their needs were. So as online communication changed and customers then very quickly picked up that they were requiring or needing a brand that was very much within their lifestyle. And that is that it's fun, it's bold, it's quirky, it's exciting, it carries a huge amount of energy. But that's just the product. We had to then align that product very much to what the service offering is from the staff. So it's almost that the staff within our Fire and Ice mold also live through that brand.
How does that work? I mean, are they trained to deal with customers differently to perhaps another hotel?
They are. I mean, our staff have specific frameworks that they need to operate within. But within those frameworks, they're given a fair amount of leeway to allow themselves some form of creativity. And that's what happens. As we say, bite-sized chunks of communication that come through all the time. You've got to be quick on your feet. You've got to be innovative and actually pick up very quickly on what the needs are of our guests. And they're changing all the time.
Keep coming back to those words, relevance and authenticity. Let's talk clothing very quickly. AmaKipKip is voted the South Africa's coolest fashion brand. Mr. Price is voted the coolest clothing store. It takes the lead from Nike. AmaKipKip first.
Yeah, AmaKipKip, the category name has actually changed. We used to poll a category called alternative fashion brand to try to give the more fringe brands a day in the sun. We changed it this year to coolest South African fashion brand to recognize what's happening in the South African fashion scene. AmaKipKip was a winner a couple of years ago in alternative fashion brand, and then saw a bit of a dip in fortune. It's driven heavily by the kids vote, actually. It's a brand that was a bit cutting edge 4 or 5 years ago for teens and more especially young adults. It has now kind of dropped down a little bit to kid cool, which indicates it's possibly on its way out. But I'm glad to see it still came up #1 in South Africa.
And very quickly, Mr. Price?
It stands for a couple of things. Cheap, accessible fashion that gives me lots of items in a repertoire, or rather than buying 1 or 2 really expensive items. Very heavily driven by the female vote, which would rather have 5 items rather than 1 expensive item. Boys are a bit different. They want 1 great pair of jeans, and then they'll buy
It also tells me that the wallet talks to that demographic. Joe, finally, every single hotel in the group has to support at least 1 social initiative.
Correct.
That talks to the whole notion of brands these days have got to do something for consumers. What are you doing?
We have over 120 hotels throughout Africa, so very much what we find is a positioning where each hotel serves a community. The staff come from that community, and in specific, our greatest asset is our team. So what we try and do within each community that each hotel operates is they run a social investment or CSI initiative through the year and support that community directly. Within the Fire and Ice brand, as an example, we move away slightly towards doing it more online, to appeal to the market that the hotel attracts. So that young, energetic brand, last week we finished off our Twitter blanket drive campaign. We raised over 3,300 blankets, and that was very much done online. It was all through social media, our regular guests communicating with one another, and in a 3 or 4 week period, the success was seen. But each hotel has to drive it differently, depending directly from the community which they operate.
That two-way brand communication has become absolutely critical. Joe Segers, Jason Levin, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Now, do you agree with the choices that we've been speaking about, and do you perhaps have a definition of what makes a cool brand? The conversation is already underway on our Facebook page on this address. And coming up on Mags on Media, while Mail and Guardian editor Nick Dawes has stepped down, his farewell interview coming up.
News that moves. ENCA.com.